And we want to welcome you once again to another YouTube presentation on behalf of the Prophecy Train. And I'm your host, Ed Stokowski, and inviting you to ask you to join us as we make another presentation. And today we're going to be dealing with the subject of what we see happening on a global level, but more in particular, we're seeing it more in different parts of the world significantly. We're talking about riots, people being upset, the suppression of attitudes and thoughts of people, and how biblically this ties in with the end times that we see quickly approaching. And as we sit here and make this presentation, in the last 2 or 3 days we have seen significant evidence in the increase in earthquakes and volcanoes and other major eruptions around planet Earth at an even given greater intensity than what we have seen in the past. And this is God's mechanism of letting you know that you're seeing the evidences of what he said would happen in Scripture pointing to the end of the age. And with that happening, there are other things happening as well in conjunction with all this. And we want to talk about the behavior of people as the moral breakdown continues and as the understanding of God becomes less and less in the hearts of the people. We begin to see that people begin to move on their own feelings and their own emotions, and they're no longer contained by the civil codes set in society, because those civil codes have become meaningless. And it almost lines up with a phrase we use in this ministry called education without a moral foundation leads to national disintegration. And we are watching many nations begin to disintegrate. We're seeing it in Europe, we're seeing it in particular in Greece, and we're seeing some of that happen in the United States, and it's happening in many, many areas. Well, why is this going on? Because there's no longer a God fiber, a restraining inside men to begin to conduct their code of conduct, which comes from biblical understanding, biblical beliefs, and a respect for your neighbor and mankind in general. Having said that, we want to come back to a couple of articles here dealing with the times that we're in. And it says the global economic crisis is leading to riots, rebellion, and revolution. Well, that in some ways is becoming more evident day by day. In Oklahoma, there's a move to begin to start their own militia. In South Carolina, there's a move to get on their own currencies. We're seeing the United States begin to divide and separate. Now, why are we dividing and why are we separating? Because we no longer have a cohesion to keep us together. In this case, it was the fiber that God put in place that we have abandoned. And today's kids are so busy with iPods and other electronic devices, they have been robbed of their relationship with a God-like understanding to morality. Well, what are we going to reap because of this negligence that's taking place in society? The reaping is going to end up in terms of chaos, revolution, an inability for governments to be able to contain the discipline in an orderly society. And we're seeing that break down more and more day by day as you watch television. And as we come to this article, it starts off as nations of the world are thrown into debt crisis, the likes of which you have never seen before. Harsh physical austerity measures will be undertaken in a flawed attempt to service the debts. We see this today. We're making money and we're trying to recreate a successful economy with no employment, no work base, and a greater disintegration of the opportunities that the younger generation used to have in years past. And the result will be the elimination of the middle class. When the middle class is absorbed into the labor class, the lower class, and lose their social, political, and economic foundations, they will riot, rebel, and revolt. And this is the point that we want to make, and we're trying to address in this session of information that the ingredients for the failure of an economy, for the failure of a society, for the failure of mankind to provide a hope and a direction to the generations behind us is proving true. You know, we look at America, and there's a scripture in Amos that talks about in the 3rd chapter, unless two agree, they cannot walk together. And we look at two parties, we look at two people, we look at a dual government. We are in a major disagreement, and we cannot walk together. And the converse of that is that a house divided cannot stand. And these are godlike principles that express great spiritual truths. They're very practical in understanding, but they're very difficult to put into practice. And we witness this today, and that's because we no longer have a true, honorable relationship with God. We have abandoned so much truth, integrity, character, and other virtues for just the opposite. We've learned to lie, we've learned to cheat, we've learned to do whatever it takes to get as much as we can for ourselves. These are some of the basic fabrics that bring a government, that bring a society to naught. And we're on our way, and we're running there very quickly. Going on a little further, Moody is a major rating agency which performs financial research and analysis on governments and commercial entities and ranks the creditworthiness of borrowers. On March 15, Moody's warned that the U.S., the U.K., Germany, France, Spain are all at risk of soaring debt costs and will have to implement austerity plans that threaten social cohesion. They're saying because we have ran so far a debt and so far amok, and this is based on the leadership and the ideas that they thought by spending money and recreating and adding a flow to see a society come back by just infusion of this money, we would be over the problem. Well, that's so contrary to God's way of thinking. Now, God talks about a man must work to have bread. In other words, you should be receiving something for nothing. And I understand that there's a situation in this country today where jobs are not available, but that's because of the structure and the power of this government and the greed that's inside of it. Now, what are the answers? As we have said already in some thread of what we've shared here, coming back to God. Now, will this country come back to God? It appears like, as you look over the history of many societies, societies fail to learn through their mistakes, and America is no exception. And it appears that as we continue to folly in the mistakes we've made, the great fall of America is almost surely marked. Excuse me. Now, coming back to this article, we will have to implement austerity plans. Moody's warned that such austerity measures increase the potential for social unrest. Is there any doubt of that in your own mind? The more we find people becoming more desperate, depending on government surpluses, government handouts, lack of support, all this idle time, and what's being fed into the minds of today's society via iPods and other computer games and so forth, we have wandered away from the values of God. When we think of the phrase, love your neighbor as yourself and love God with your whole heart, mind, and soul, those two prominent commandments that Christ said, if you've done it, you've fulfilled it all. We are so removed from the understanding of those principles. Which brings us to another scriptural point which we would like to come to, and that's in Timothy, 2nd chapter of Timothy, as we grab our Bible, and just to bear with us, 2nd Timothy, we're going to be going to the 3rd chapter, and you're going to see how God mentions where we are in these last days. And for those of you who have a Bible, you may want to read with me, and it goes on to say, but know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents,